One in three divorces in America now happens after the age of 50. Let that sink in for a minute. During our parents' generation, maybe one in 10. But today, it's a completely different story. This is what we call gray divorce. And we're operating under the old assumptions as to what gray divorce is, who it affects, and what it actually means. So today, I'm going to bust 7 myths about gray divorce because if you're going through it, considering it, or even if your parents are navigating it, then you deserve the truth. Hi, I'm Lisa, and if we have not met, I am a proud Canadian. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, a retired teacher and counselor. And on this channel, what we do is we talk about navigating retirement, going through life's second act solo, and hopefully bringing some clarity and some compassion to these stages of our lives. Another thing about me is I hate being a statistic. And unfortunately, I realized when I was doing my deep dive and that all I have done is just contributed to the statistic of gray divorces, even without knowing it. I also learned that it's one of the most significant demographic shifts that's happening right now, and yet it's still shrouded in a bunch of outdated myths. So grab a coffee and let's clear up those myths. And by the way, myth 4 kind of surprised me, and myth 5 just broke my heart. So let's dive in. Myth number 1, gray divorce means a long marriage ended late in life. This is what people tend to picture. It's a couple that's been together for 30, 40 years, and suddenly they just decide to call it quits after decades together. But that's not really the full picture. The truth is that gray divorce just means that we're divorcing after the age of 50, regardless of how long that marriage lasted, and regardless of what color your hair is, by the way. I thought I was out of the running of this because I was a redhead at the time. Turns out it didn't matter what color my hair was when I divorced. I was over 50, so yes, I contribute to the gray divorce statistic. So let's break this down even further. It turns out that only about 34% of the really long-standing marriages, the ones where we're only married once, are the ones that contribute to the gray divorce statistic. It's mostly the marriages that happened later in life. So it's second and third marriages that are greatly increasing that statistic. Another interesting stat is that your second marriage is more likely to end in divorce versus your first, and your third is even more likely to end in divorce. Why is this? There's lots of pressure that comes along with getting married later in life, financial strains. If there's a blended family, that adds another layer of things like child support, getting to know the stepkids. And then, of course, you bring your baggage from your first and your second marriages into your third, and it just compounds the problems. I know when I got married later in life, I was thinking, you know what? I'm older. I've been through this. I know what I want, got some experience behind me, and I will be able to navigate this marriage a whole lot better. Was not the case at all. In fact, that marriage ended in 3 years. So I can back up the research when it says that later life marriages are more statistically fragile and less secure because I lived it. When they say it's a gray divorce, they're referring to your age, not the length of your marriage. Bottom line is if you're over 50 when you divorce, you are having a gray divorce. Myth number 2 is that gray divorce is rare. Maybe 30 years ago it was rare, but not today. The truth today is that it's historically high. For example, back in the 70s through the 90s, it was more like 1 in 10, but those numbers started jumping. They actually doubled by the 1990s. And then if you were 65 or older, those numbers tripled to the point where in 2019, 1 in 3 divorces were involving somebody 50 years old or older. And that number is not going down. In fact, it seems to be sticking around. It's quite constant. and it's even incrementally going up. So, guys, this is not a blip. This seems to be a long-term societal shift, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And especially since our population seems to be aging, I think those numbers are just going to increase. Myth number 3: people divorce late in life because they're bored or selfish. Got to admit, this one kind of bothered me, especially if you saw my last video talking about why so many people are choosing to be solo later on in life. There is this narrative out there that people who divorce after 50 are just throwing away a good thing because they want excitement, they're being impulsive, they're going through that midlife crisis where they want a hot car and a hot girl. But when you really dig into it, it's not about wanting more excitement. It's about actually wanting more peace. Most people who have gone through this divorce tend to talk about things like emotional disconnection or long-standing issues that they've never really resolved. They're looking at each other and saying, you know what? I do not want to go through 30 more years of what I have now. This is my opportunity. The kids are gone, and this is my opportunity to pursue those dreams that I may not have pursued before, or find that calmness in their life that they hadn't had. They're not actually chasing excitement. They're chasing relief from decades of emotional neglect or feeling like they haven't been seen, relief from having unequal amounts of labor around the house, child rearing, looking after the home, and it just builds resentment over the years. Relief from once the kids go and they're looking at each other and realizing, who are you? I heard a quote long time ago. It said, the best thing that you can do for your kids is look after their mom, make her happy, date her, never forget that she's your top priority, because if she's happy, the children are happy, the home is happy. But so often we get so caught up in our lives that we forget to create this list of priorities, and then all of a sudden the children who were the glue that kept that family unit together are now gone, and the parents are looking at each other and saying, first of all, I don't even know who you are anymore. Because lots of times that couple can just go off in different paths and become different people, and they don't even realize it, even though they're living under the same roof. So when that glue is gone, they really can't figure out why they should be together anymore. And relief from the pain of infidelity. And this surprised me, this stat. It seems that the highest rate of infidelity for men is in their 70s. And for women, it's ages 50 to 70. So the idea that older people aren't dealing with betrayal, that's just not true. And finally, relief from the chaos. People are just looking for calmness, creating that space of peace, especially if there's been decades of unresolved conflict within the home. They're just done. And now's their opportunity to find that peace that they so desperately want. Myth number 4 is gray divorce mostly affects men financially. And let's be clear, both are impacted for sure, but women typically experience a devastating financial blow. For example, women experience 45% decline in their standard of living after a gray divorce, whereas men's standard of living drops about 21%. Poverty levels for women who divorce after the age of 50 are like twice as high as those who divorce before they're 50. So really, the older we are when we divorce, the harder it is to recoup financially. And why is it that women fare worse than men when it comes to gray divorce? Because of time out of the workforce. Many women spent years raising children, which results in smaller Social Security benefits because of less work experience, or in Canada, it's our CPP, our Canada Pension Plan, that we contribute to. And then let's face it, as we try to re-enter the workforce after being out of it for a while, if we had been retired, or we had been spending a lot of those years looking after the kids at home, finding a job becomes really difficult. I was really fortunate that I started teaching right out of university, so I resented the amount of money that came off my paycheck every month for 31 years. But now that I'm here, I was incredibly grateful for that. And I'm also really grateful that my ex and I created a post-nuptial agreement because we were going into a marriage later in life. We sat down with a lawyer and created a contract. And of course, my pension was the thing that I wanted to protect the most. I had seen other couples go through a marriage crumble and they lost a whole bunch of their pension. So I wanted to make sure mine was protected, and he had assets like land and so forth that he wanted to protect. I'm incredibly grateful we did that because that is why I could walk away with my full pension. So I'm very grateful for the situation I'm in right now, but I can't help but think about had the father of my children and I stayed together. We were married for 18 years. Had we stayed together, oh my goodness, we'd be mortgage free at this point. We'd have double pensions because he was a teacher as well. We would have just been really in a good position. So, because of the divorce, we both took a very big hit. And neither one of us to this day are in a situation that could have been had we stayed together. The bottom line is that freedom that we're going after later in life with the gray divorce comes with a very real price tag. Myth number 5 just broke my heart. The myth is that gray divorce is easier because the kids are grown. But the truth is that adult children still struggle with this, just differently. And often their pain is invisible and dismissed. Researchers say that when they're interviewing the adult children of divorced couples, they often feel like their concerns are ignored or dismissed. They feel like they're being told, you're old enough to understand, you're too old to be hurt. But adult children report a wide range of emotions: shock, sadness, anger, worry, loss, grief, isolation, loneliness, anxiety, shame, instability, guilt, disorientation, uncertainty, sorrow, and hopelessness. Just like younger children, they're going to have the same kinds of questions. What does this mean for our family? What are we going to do about family vacations, Christmases, mealtime? Who are we supposed to talk to? Are we supposed to be on one person's side or the other? Looking back on our family, was there lies going on? Is everything I remember even the truth? And there seems to be a shift in how much the adult children will contact their parents. They tend to gravitate more towards their mom. And so the research says that the mom will get probably twice as much contact with her kids as the father. So just a heads up, dads, make a concerted effort to reach out to your kids because they need to know everything's going to be okay, that you're still their dad, that you're still there for them. Another fear that they have is, okay, so who's going to look after our parents when they are financially insecure? Do we have to pick up the slack now? Because instead of combining their finances and looking after each other, now they're in 2 separate houses. So does this mean that we have to step up? So that's a big worry for a lot of adult children. And then, of course, there's the impact on their own relationships. They start thinking, if my parents couldn't make it work, how am I going to make it work? Does this mean marriage doesn't work? So they start questioning relationships in general. And I think a big one is the family home. They have had this home base for many years. And lots of times that family home tends to be sold in a divorce. So their own identity is being shifted. Their history is being shaken up. So it is a big deal for adult children. I think about my own kids around Christmas time, where they not only are expected to come see me for Christmas, but they have to go see their father now. So that's a whole other trip. And we live in different cities. And then they have to go see their spouses parents or family members. So they end up spending a lot of time on the road going to different places instead of just the one. And that was not their choice. So I am very cognizant of that. And I try to work with them because I am empathetic to that. I think the bottom line is divorce is going to be painful for our kids, and it's not going to be any less just because they're older. And in some cases, they might actually feel a sense of relief because they've noticed that you and your partner have been miserable for years and they recognize that you are happier. But it's still a loss. And I think we have to be very much aware that our kids are now going to go through a grieving process, and we need to honor that. Myth number 6 is that men and women recover the same way. The assumption is that both men and women bounce back about the same way, right? Actually, no. The truth is that men and women recover differently, not better or worse, just differently. So let's talk about repartnering first. For women, only about 22% will repartner within 10 years after their gray divorce. For men, that rate jumps up to about 37%. Men are also more likely to remarry sooner than women. And for a lot of men, what they will do is instead of remarrying, they will cohabitate with somebody. But here's what's really fascinating. It's about what each gender is actually seeking. So for women, many older women who went through this gray divorce, they just look forward to living alone. Some may want to date for sure, and some want nothing to do with it. But even for the people who want to date, they no longer want to live with anybody. They don't want to cohabitate at all. You know what? Because after decades of caretaking, they basically just want to focus on their own values, their own interests, their own identity. They're basically prioritizing autonomy. Whereas men, they seem to often seek companionship faster. And older men who live alone are considerably more likely to experience social isolation than women who live alone. Because even though the women are prioritizing living alone, they're still going out there and making those social connections, right? Diving into their communities, volunteering, going on trips with the girlfriends, even dinners with the girlfriends. Whereas a lot of guys will isolate themselves in their own home. And I find it interesting too, because if the women would repartner with somebody, that could help with the financial aspect. But they're putting other things like their autonomy, their sense of freedom, their sense of peace, their sense of I can do what I want when I want above the financial aspect of things. The bottom line is it's really all about what people are valuing at this stage of life. And that's really going to dictate their behavior in terms of how they set up their lives for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And myth number 7 is that gray divorce means you failed. And this really is the big one. It's the myth that says, you couldn't make it work. You somehow gave up. You didn't try hard enough. After all these years, why couldn't you make it work? But the truth of the matter is, gray divorce often reflects growth, clarity, changing priorities, not failure. So let's reframe this. Longevity changes the equation. People are living longer, potentially 20, 30 years longer than their grandparents, and they're realizing they don't want to spend their remaining decades in an unfulfilling marriage. Another point is that there's less stigma around divorce these days. Divorce is far more culturally acceptable than in previous generations. And this means that people can make these changes in their lives instead of staying in a marriage that is maybe toxic, unhealthy for them, just out of embarrassment that they couldn't make it work. Another point, financial independence in women. This enables choice. So because today's women have college educations, careers, pensions, financial autonomy that previous generations didn't have, women feel like they have options now. My mother, she said to me when I was going through my divorce, she said, "Who's the other man?" And I said, "There is no other man. What are you talking about?" And she said, women don't end their marriages unless there's another man. And I was floored by that. And that was not the case at all. But it goes to show that she was very dependent upon the man in her life and could not even see a future of being on her own and couldn't relate to me wanting to be on my own and having the financial autonomy in order to do that. And another point, success is subjective. Staying in something that is only causing you pain isn't virtuous. It's painful. And sometimes staying in something that is toxic and unhealthy can do some terrible things to you physically. For example, when I was with the father of my kids, I ended up going into the hospital. They couldn't find a biological reason for the symptoms I was having. I was at a specialist and we did all kinds of tests. He said to me, "Can you think of a long-term stressor in your life?" And he knew nothing about my personal life. We just talked about biology. And I said, "Yes, I can think of something." And he said, "It is time for you to do something about it because it's killing you." When you get that kind of news, you realize life is too short and I am not going to spend it in a relationship that is actually physically making me ill. I refuse to do that to myself. I refuse to do that to my children. It even took me a few months to get my thoughts together and sit my husband down and have that crucial conversation. There was still a lot of guilt and shame that came with this decision to end this marriage. Even though it was such a difficult marriage, I was thinking, I'm tough. I said in sickness and in health, I'm strong. I can do this. But then somebody said to me, strength is not the ability just to keep taking it. Strength is the ability to actually do something about it. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. So the bottom line is staying in something that no longer fits is not success. Sometimes choosing our peace and our health is the most courageous choice of all. So if you are navigating a gray divorce or supporting someone who is, or just trying to understand what this shift is all about, you're not alone. This is one of the most significant demographic changes of our time, and it's reshaping what it means to age in America and Canada alike. Great divorce is not about giving up. It's choosing how you want to live the rest of your life. And that choice, whatever it is, deserves respect. So drop a comment below and let me know. Were any of these myths surprising to you? Is there a myth about gray divorce that I didn't cover? And if you like these conversations about aging and relationships and navigating the second act of our lives, then subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you won't miss any of the future videos. And speaking of other videos, I did a video recently about all the reasons as to why people are embracing solo living later in life, and why that is actually one of the healthiest choices they're making for themselves. If you're interested in that video, it will be right here. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.